In this Diablo 4 video, I want to talk about one mechanic that's often overlooked in a lot of people's builds, and that is Lucky Hit. Lucky Hit is an incredibly powerful mechanic in this game, and there are often things associated with it that players don't quite understand or they don't think of when putting their build together. And in this video, I want to explore how you can incorporate Lucky Hit into your build and why I think just about every build doesn't have enough Lucky Hit and how it can make it better. So for starters, let's take a look at what Lucky Hit actually is. Now, if you mouse over any active skill in the game, no matter what class you are, it's going to have a Lucky Hit chance. This means this is the likelihood when you use this skill that you're going to get a Lucky Hit. Now, there is obviously some RNG involved in this because if it says, for instance, 50% or 70% or 20%, it's not always going to guarantee a Lucky Hit 1 out of every 5 times or 1 out of every 2 times. So there is some RNG factored in there, but statistically, the higher your Lucky Hit chance, the more frequently you're going to gain Lucky Hits. And the other part of this is things that can trigger when you get a Lucky Hit. So first of all, you have the proccing a Lucky Hit, and then you have the chance on Lucky Hit. So a lot of mechanics in this game that are associated with Lucky Hit have a % chance to trigger when you score a Lucky Hit. So not only do you have to trigger a Lucky Hit, but then you have to roll good RNG on that Lucky Hit in order to trigger that effect. So what this means is that if you have something that says 10% chance on Lucky Hit, you have to trigger a Lucky Hit, and then you have a 1 in 10 chance, roughly, of triggering that effect after you trigger one. And one great thing about Lucky Hit mechanics in this game is that you can have many different Lucky Hit triggers, things that happen when you trigger a Lucky Hit, and they all roll independently, meaning that even if one misses, maybe you trigger 2 other ones. And so having a lot of effects that trigger off a Lucky Hit can be great. Essentially, it's not an all or none proposition, meaning you're not going to trigger all of your Lucky Hit effects or 0. So you're always going to be triggering some of them generally. So the more Lucky Hit effects you have and the higher Lucky Hit, the more likely these things are going to happen. So when you're talking about how to boost your Lucky Hit chance, when you find Lucky Hit chance on your gear, you're going to roll a value on that, and then you can upgrade your gear to increase that. Usually gloves have a Lucky Hit. You can go on them. And jewelry have Lucky Hit. So you want to look for Lucky Hit on these items. Sometimes offhands can have them as well if you're running a class that uses offhands. So you want to find Lucky Hit on these items and stack it up if you're looking to increase your Lucky Hit chance. And what this does is it adds directly, additively, to the base value of a Lucky Hit of a skill. So if a skill has like 20% base Lucky Hit chance, and you have an extra 25% Lucky Hit chance, now that skill has a 45% chance of causing a Lucky Hit when you use it. This will obviously increase the number of Lucky Hits that you get because more and more of your regular attacks will become Lucky Hits, giving them the opportunity to trigger your Lucky Hit effects. So why is this such a powerful mechanic? How does this factor into things? Why am I making a video just dedicated to this? Well, let's take a look at some examples of that so you can get a better idea. So for starters, let's take a look at the Hewed Flesh passive from Necromancer. This makes it so on Lucky Hit, your damage has an up to 12% chance at max rank to create a corpse at target's location. And this chance is doubled against bosses. So just for the sake of argument, let's say that you had a 100% Lucky Hit chance. You obviously won't have this, but let's just say that you did. This means that if you had a 100% Lucky Hit chance, 1 in 8 damage that you see trigger on the screen with your character is going to create a corpse. On harder difficulties of the game, when you're running a nightmare dungeon or something, and you walk into a group of enemies and there are 20 enemies on the screen, and you throw an AoE, you're going to do about 50 or so damages really, really quickly. This means you're going to generate, at a 100% Lucky Hit chance, about 7 or 8 corpses instantly. But let's say your Lucky Hit chance is actually 50%. Well, you're going to get 3 or 4 corpses out of that. Those 3 or 4 corpses can then be detonated with Corpse Explosion, which AoEs and hits everything around it, which will then trigger more corpses. It doesn't matter which version of Corpse Explosion you use, that's just the way this passive works. That's extremely powerful, as it just allows you to spam Corpse Explosion at that point, and you don't even need to use any resources. Now, if your Lucky Hit chance is like 20% or 10%, then this obviously goes down and it becomes harder to pull off, which is one of the reasons Lucky Hit is so important, because if you build into it, then this is possible, but if you don't, then you would struggle to create this sort of thing to happen. Next, let's take a look at the Victimize key passive for the rogue. This makes it so that on Lucky Hit, dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy has up to a 30% chance to cause an explosion, dealing 23% of its original damage to them and surrounding enemies. So why is this powerful? Well, again, let's assume you have a 100% Lucky Hit chance for the sake of math here. That means that 1 in 3 chance, roughly, of dealing direct damage to a vulnerable enemy is going to trigger one of these explosions. Now, if you have a way to make a group of enemies all vulnerable, which the rogue has many ways of doing, then theoretically you could trigger a chain reaction of explosions that keep triggering more explosions that wipe out an entire group of enemies. And that's simply because the damage that you deal with the explosion is direct damage. Next, let's take a look at the Earthen key passive from the Druid class. This makes it so that on lucky hit, damaging an enemy with Earth skills has a 5% chance to restore all of your spirit or cause all of your attacks to be guaranteed critical strikes for 5 seconds. This chance is increased by 10% for critical strikes and 10% if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. So again, for the sake of argument, let's assume your lucky hit chance is 100%. This would give you 1 in 20 chance when damaging any enemy with an Earth skill to trigger this effect, and that goes down to 1 in 6 or 7 if that effect critically strikes or hits a stunned, immobilized, or knocked back target. That is incredibly powerful because Earth has a lot of AoE effects that hit lots of enemies at a time, allowing you to trigger this effect rather easily. Now, you obviously don't have a 100% lucky hit chance, but the point here is to illustrate that if you increase your lucky hit chance and you get closer and closer to 100%, those are going to be roughly what your numbers are, so that's why you should be building for lucky hit. Next, let's look at Elemental Attunement. This makes it so that critical strikes have a 5% chance to reset the cooldown of your defensive skills, and this can only happen once every 10 seconds. So what's interesting about this passive and some other passives out there is that you have to have a lucky hit on a critical strike. It can't just be a regular lucky hit, so you have a couple factors that limit the chances of this happening. However, if you walk into a large group of enemies again and you drop a giant meteor on them and you get like 15 crits, odds are you're going to trigger this at least one time. That will refresh your either flame shield or your ice armor or whatever you're using for your defensive skill. This is fantastic because you can almost guarantee this when you're fighting like a pack of enemies. And obviously the higher your critical chance and the higher your lucky hit chance, the more likely this is to trigger. So next, let's look at Aspect of Anemia. This is a legendary aspect of the Barbarian class, and it says lucky hit, direct damage against bleeding enemies has a 20 to 30% chance to stun them for 2 seconds. This is absolutely huge because if you hit a group of enemies with Rend and then use any direct damaging ability, if you had a 100% lucky hit chance, you would theoretically have up to a 1 in 3 chance to stun each one of them individually. Now, this is a bit different than the Barbarian's Concussion passive, which says lucky hit. Skills using bludgeoning weapons have a 10% chance to stun enemies for 3 seconds, or up to a 15% chance when using a two-handed bludgeoning weapon. In this case, if you had a 100% lucky hit chance, you'd have a 1 in 10 chance to stun each individual enemy individually, as it would check against each enemy individually, or you would have a 1 in 6 or 7 chance if you were using a two-handed bludgeoned weapon. Note that even though that says on skill use, it still rolls individually for each enemy hit, so you can stun some of them, or stun one of them, or stun 5 of them, and this, even though it doesn't say damage, it is rolled that way. It's not an all or none proposition as I previously posted after further testing, so I wanted to make sure I corrected this information. There are obviously much more lucky hit effects in the game, and I won't go through all of them in this video, but the whole point of this video was to illustrate that there's some extremely powerful effects in this game that when built properly with a high lucky hit chance can make absolutely devastating builds. Some builds that can break the game or have insane damage will be using this mechanic, so if you want to improve your build, I strongly recommend that you invest heavily in lucky hit and look for things that you can add that have lucky hit to your build to get the most out of it. Stay tuned for more Diablo 4 build videos and guides. I didn't quite have enough time to get my Rogue Bow Archer together today, but I will get it together tomorrow. And I will have another video too on another mechanic in this game that I think is often overlooked. I won't go into what it is just yet, but you can look forward to that.